Well, did you feel it? A 3.6 magnitude earthquake rattled the Inland Empire overnight. It happened just before midnight between Banning and Oak Glen. There are no reports of any injuries or damage. With 3.6, that's usually the case. And new at 7, today is National Richter Scale Day that honors the birthday of the inventor of the Richter scale, which is what we use to measure earthquakes.
And so we're so happy to be joined this morning by seismologist Dr. Lucy Jones live. Thanks so much for being here. It's always great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Happy Richter Scale Day.
Yeah, I still think of it as his birthday, but sure, let's go with it.
Tell us about the history of it, because we actually booked you before we even knew about this earthquake. We booked you yesterday to talk about the Richter scale. What should people know about it, how it came to be? It's a local Southern California thing.
There's a connection.
Right,
Yeah.
well, it's, has been used around the world. Richter's fundamental contribution was that he came up with the idea of magnitude, of a way of expressing the size of an earthquake is like the total energy released in an earthquake, but in a compact scale. So to get it down between 1 and 10, essentially, you had to, it's 32, it's a factor of 32 units of energy for each unit of magnitude. Right? So, but it was a very fundamental contribution. And of course, the science has advanced in the last 100 years, and we have much more accurate ways of measuring it. But we still converted to the scale that he used because we think that people understand that idea, which is a bit of a stretch. It's a pretty complicated concept.
Well, I recently took a class from you, and you talked about how you can say there was an 8.4 magnitude earthquake, but what does that really mean for people? That you have to break it down in some way. And so how has that changed?
Well, I see, before Richter came up with the magnitude scale, people only had intensity. Right. So you'd have an earthquake in Inglewood, and they'd say, oh, this is really strong. And the people in Pasadena say, no, it's not. And they think they were feeling two different earthquakes. So what Richter was doing was showing there's one fundamental size that's not what you feel. But then it's been adopted by so many people, they often think it is what you feel. And we have something called the intensity scale that describes what you feel. And now, whenever there's an earthquake, you can go on the USGS website and see not just what the magnitude is, but what the distribution of intensities are.
And this is also a good time, I think, for awareness. We were talking about this the other day, that people, you get a little complacent when you haven't had a bad earthquake in a while. I still try to keep my shoes next to the bed. But
that's a very important one.
Other than that, I think I need to relook at my kit. So how do we prepare?
Well, all right. I actually don't have a kit because I know I'm not going anywhere.
Okay.
I do keep supplies in the car because in case I'm somewhere else.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Right. Californians always have their car with them. So I have an extra pair of running shoes in case I'm wearing those things that women wear. I have some blankets to keep warm and certain types of, shelf life water. But then also, at home, you want to make sure you have enough water. Probably most importantly is to if you own a house, get it inspected and make sure it's as strong as it can be, because building codes aren't retroactive. And most buildings in Southern California, we can make stronger and more resistant, and every analysis says they're all worthwhile.
I spoke with you right after that earthquake in Turkey, and we talked about the infrastructure there. Is there anything we can learn that we didn't already know following that huge earthquake in Turkey and Syria?
Yes, though we haven't completed the process yet. That earthquake is essentially identical to what we expect on the San Andreas Fault. And so many buildings came down. Clearly, part of it was they didn't implement the building code or they had old buildings. But in addition, the shaking that was measured was quite a bit larger than the International Building Code says you should get for this type of earthquake. So it raises the possibility we are underestimating the ground motions we'll actually get from the San Andreas. And we really need to understand that because, to save this tiny amount of money, we build only to the barest margin. The only thing the building code requires is don't collapse.
Right.
And we'd like to do better than that.
Well, that's, I know I see it in my neighborhood all the time, the retrofitting happening on buildings. You talked about this in the class that you did too, that we aren't nearly as prepared as we think. How do you think we're doing in terms of looking at the retrofitting of buildings in Southern California, and how much more do we need to do?
I seem to always use the same answer: much better than we were, and not nearly as much as we could be.
Yeah.
And so the fact that the retrofitting's going on in a dozen different cities is really, really important. But there's 180 other cities in Southern California that haven't adopted it. So I would like to see those, especially the retrofitting of the soft first story, like you're showing there. That's a critical one. That's what killed people in Northridge. Also, the non-ductile concrete buildings. Only the city of Los Angeles and now the county for unincorporated areas have actually mandated retrofit of the concrete buildings. And because concrete is so heavy, those are the deadliest types of buildings.
Dr. Lucy Jones, it's always great to have you. Always good reminders for all of us, too. Thank you so much for making the time for us this morning. Appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for having me on.
Happy Richter Day. All right.